Hi everyone, this is meteorologist Joel Curtis with the National Weather Service with your Alaska Weather TV show. Starting out with our watches, warnings, and advisories. Only one warning for the state this evening, and that's for the AKwx area for a blizzard warning. And the blizzard warning should end at about 7 p.m. or so, but there will be blowing snow all night there. Also, on the river breakup front, there's no real news, but I want to thank everybody that's taking river observations so much. We couldn't do it without you. Okay, looking at our satellite loop, you see a little bit of warm air moving up into the Gulf of Alaska and old low spinning up southeast of Alaska. The dominant feature today in today's weather is high pressure all the way from Russia on over into the northern sections of the state, onto the Brooks Range. And a little bit, that high pressure is 1,040 millibars. It's causing a little bit of blowing snow there that's caused the blizzard warning for AKwx. Also, you can see a rather weak system with a couple of fronts wrapped around it south of the Alaska Peninsula and also the eastern Aleutians. And then we have a 1034 millibar high pressure center southwest of Haida Gwaii. A little bit of light snow along the Alaska Range, right up to the Wrangell Mountains, I should say, up to the right up to the Alcan border. For tonight's weather, that high pressure continues with 1,040 millibars all across the northern half of the state or so. We see that little bit of warm air moving up into the Gulf of Alaska. It's also hitting Kodiak Island for a little bit of mixed precipitation and the Lake Clark area. Rain to the south, mainly for the Alaska Peninsula and the eastern Aleutians. Also a little bit of a weak trough going through the western Aleutians, causing some mixed precipitation out there. For Wednesday's weather, a 1,034 millibar high over the northern portion of the state. That's weakened a little bit as that low moves up 986 millibars south of Unimak Island. Front wrapped around that with a little bit, the warm air has really dissipated out. Onshore flow for Kodiak Island across Bristol Bay or so. A little bit of light snow in the higher elevations, but mostly rain wrapped around that system. And then for Thursday's weather, that high has weakened to 1,029 millibars just off of southwest of Banks Island there, north of the Alcan. 1,010 millibar weak low has formed in the Gulf of Alaska with some warm air out ahead of that. Not much, a whole lot going on. A few snow showers south of Nunivak Island and into the central Bering Sea, and then a trough extending up through the Bering Sea for a little mixed precipitation the farther west you get. Looking at our low temperatures Wednesday morning, upper 30s and lower 40s for southeast Alaska, 32 for Yakutat, and as you get over to south central, upper 20s, lower 30s, and then up to 40 degrees for Kodiak Island. And then for Wednesday afternoon, temperatures in the 50s all across southeast Alaska and on over into south central Alaska. Also, we've got 45 for Kodiak Island. Then for Thursday morning, temperatures in the upper 20s, lower 30s for southeast, up to 35 for Baranof Island, 27 for the Yakutat area, and then in the upper 20s to lower 30s for most of south central, but you get 38 down by Homer and 41 for Kodiak. And then temperatures quite warm in springtime temperatures in southeast Alaska, up to 61 for Skagway, 53 for Yakutat, and in the 50s and upper 40s for most of south central there, and then 46 for Kodiak. Looking along at northern Alaska, single digits as you get further east along the north slope, But then as you get further south, you can see temperatures in the teens and then all the way up to 19 for Fairbanks and into the 20s as you get down by the Norton Sound area. High temperatures in the 20s and lower 30s for the North Slope, and then all the way up into the 40s, 57 for McGrath, and then temperatures in the 40s around Norton Sound. For Thursday morning, we see single digits again along the North Slope, all the way up to 15 for Kaktovik and 13 for Point Hope. And then as you get down toward Fairbanks, that's 25 degrees. Also temperatures in the 20s and lower 30s as you get down to the Norton Sound area. And then for Thursday afternoon, temperatures in the 20s and lower 30s along the North Slope, getting into the 40s as you get further south, and then finally 50s, and then a whopping 63 for McGrath, so spring has really sprung. For our low temperatures Wednesday morning for Southwest, we could see temperatures in the lower 30s to mid 30s or so as you get into the Bristol Bay area and southwest Alaska, but temperatures in the 40s and the upper 30s as you go out the Alaska Peninsula into the Aleutians, 33 for the Pribilofs and 36 for Adak. Then as our high temperatures Wednesday afternoon, temperatures in the lower 50s to upper 40s and the mid 40s as you get over toward the Bethel area. Going out the Alaska Peninsula, mid 40s all the way out the Aleutians until you get to Shemya, and 39 for the Pribilofs. And then for our low temperatures Thursday morning, temperatures in the upper 30s, in the 40s as you go out the Alaska Peninsula, 35 for Adak and 34 for the Pribilofs. And then for a high temperature Thursday afternoon, temperatures in the 40s all across the southwest, 40s as you go out the Alaska Peninsula, 39 for the Pribilofs and 39 for Shemya. Thank you and stay safe out there.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Hi everyone, and now for your aviation forecast. Starting out with Wednesday morning, an area of extensive IFR all along across the southern part of the Bering Sea, including all of the Aleutians, most of the Alaska Peninsula, Kodiak Island, and also some IFR conditions in the interior sections of southeast Alaska. For Wednesday afternoon, that area of IFR continues over the Aleutians, much of the Bering Sea, also up into Bristol Bay, Alaska Peninsula, and Kodiak Island. On Thursday morning, the area is pretty much the same, hitting Kodiak Island, Alaska Peninsula, the eastern Aleutians and central Aleutians, all the way up to Nunivak Island, and much of the Bering Sea, including the Pribilofs. And then on Thursday afternoon, extensive area of IFR again over the Bering Sea, some marginal VFR conditions on the Bering Sea side of the Alaska Peninsula and eastern Aleutians, and then extensive IFR going out into the Gulf of Alaska. Starting with our past conditions on Wednesday, Anaktuvik VFR, Adigan VFR, Lake Clark and Merrill both VFR, Rainy VFR, Windy VFR, Isabel Pass VFR, Mentassa Pass, a little bit of marginal VFR in the morning becoming VFR, Tahita Pass VFR, Portage VFR, Chilkoot and White Pass over in southeast Alaska, marginal VFR improving to VFR in the afternoon. Our freezing levels are right complex this morning, including over the surface for much of the state, but then as you get out into the Aleutians and all the way up through the Bering Strait, a slug of warm air moved up with the low. It's about 6,000 feet or so, and then as you get further south, all the way up to 8,000 feet, and some warmer air aloft over southeast Alaska, including up to 6,000 feet over Prince of Wales Island. And then looking at our icing on Wednesday, we have a small area of isolated moderate off of Dixon Entrance, above 4,000 feet. Also above 4,000 feet from Kodiak Island, most of the Alaska Peninsula, Bristol Bay, down through the eastern Aleutians, and then we have some above 4,000 feet as you get into the far western Aleutians and the Komodorsky Islands. Our jet stream on Wednesday, First of all, we got northwesterlies over southeast Alaska, all the way up to 110 knots as you get further south, but up to 95 knots offshore. Also 80 knot northwesterlies over much of the northern interior. And then as we come around to the low that's been south of the Alaska Peninsula, we have some southerlies up to 100 knots as they approach Kodiak Island, 90 knots over the Alaska Peninsula, and then comes around to east 95 knots on the Bering Sea side of Unimak Island. Also some southerlies 75 knots over pointing towards St. Matthew and the Gulf of Anadyr. For our 9,000 foot winds on Wednesday, we've got first of all a circulation around that low southeast of Dutch Harbor. 65 knots in that circulation, 35 knot easterlies as you get out over southwest Alaska, and reducing down to 20 knots as you get up toward Norton and Kotzebue Sound. 35 knot northerlies over the North Slope, 45 knot as in the eastern North Slope, and northwesterlies up to about 50 knots as you get further south into southeast Alaska. For our 3,000 foot winds, we've got 60 knots up in through Bristol Bay, and up to 50 knots in that circulation around the low, and 40 knots as you approach Kodiak Island, 35 knots over the west coast of Alaska. And our turbulence on Wednesday, we've got considerable moderate turbulence all along the Alaska Peninsula, Bristol Bay, and down through the eastern Aleutians, below 4,000 feet, below 3,000 feet as you get further west, and then below 3,000 feet out to the Pribilofs, and some below 3,000 feet out over the Gulf. Also, we do have in those northwesterlies below 4,000 feet, considerable moderate over the southern panhandle, and that is really mostly in the morning and should be decreasing in the afternoon. Well, that's all for our aviation segment. Fly safe out there.
Some places on the surface you might have these steep cracks and giant fissures that you would have to be careful not to fall into. In other places you might see towers of ice right next to places that were relatively smooth. You might see places that were dark. Ice there takes the form of rock. It's frozen solid until you dig down into that ocean. So you may see some things that look similar to Earth, but you may see some things that are very different.
That voice you just heard?
I am Morgan Kramer, NASA scientist.
I love it.
That's Morgan. She's probably one of NASA's best spokespeople for exploring our solar system's icy moons.
Europa is a fascinating place. It has this liquid water ocean that's about 3 times the volume of all of Earth's oceans combined. That's a lot of water.
To understand what makes Earth so special, sometimes you need to back up and take in the big picture. Remember, the cryosphere is every place on Earth with frozen water. And water is one of the biggest indicators for life.
Every place, at least so far, that we have found life, we found water along with it.
And so far, Earth is the only planet we know of with life. Although Europa isn't the only icy moon in our solar system, NASA has identified it as one of those places with key astrobiological potential. Morgan is a collaborator on the Mapping Imaging Spectrometer for Europa, an instrument selected for NASA's next mission to Jupiter's icy moon Europa. But she's also more than just a scientist working in a laboratory. She's preparing future NASA missions for success on the surface of alien worlds. This year, Morgan and her colleagues were in the field studying how life colonizes in fresh lava.
Earth, it turns out, has a lot of excellent, what we call analog environments, places that are similar enough to some of these other worlds that we can conduct some tests and we can do some analyses here. Now, they're not perfect, of course, They're not going to be exactly like Europa, but we can still learn a lot by testing in these environments. Some of these places include Antarctica and the Arctic Circle, but there are other places too, Alaska, Greenland, even Iceland. Any place where you have a lot of ice, because guess what the surface of Europa is made of? A lot of ice.
Studying the cryosphere doesn't just have big implications for Earth. It also matters for the frozen worlds in our own cosmic backyard.
If we're able to find life or evidence of past life on a place like Europa, that tells us that not only can life happen in other places, but it's common enough that it happened at least twice in the same tiny solar system. That means that the universe is wide open in terms of how much life we might find, the types of life we might find. It would revolutionize how we see ourselves and the possibilities for contact in the universe. It would be amazing. Oh, it's so exciting.
As it flows down the valleys, it actually carves those valleys out and it makes them deeper. So it creates these beautiful fjords where the ice flows down, snakes out down to the ocean or to the lakes or further inland. And so that ice is flowing, it's moving. My interest in glaciers comes from the sheer size of these things and how much they're able to change on human timescales. And so the amount of mass and energy being transferred by glaciers around the globe is tremendous. It's an absolutely fascinating thing to study from space.
Mountain glaciers are some of the most charismatic parts of the cryosphere. Some might cling to the edges of cliffs at higher elevations, then lay bare and flat in a broad plain, looking cracked and weathered like elephant skin, before tumbling thousands of feet toward the sea and terminating in a dramatic calving front. They're like motion frozen in time, until they aren't. They tell a story about the distant past and yet are incredibly responsive to the present. You can understand why they'd be captivating to all of us, and especially cryospheric scientists. Meet Alex Gardner, a cryospheric scientist at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, who is going to help break down what a classic West Coast North American glacier might look like, where high amounts of snow dump onto the mountains.
And at higher elevations, there's melt in summer, but not enough melt to get rid of all of that snow. And so that snow accumulates, it compacts, it turns into ice, and it starts to flow under its own weight, and it flows down the valleys. And as it flows down the valleys, it actually carves those valleys out and it makes them deeper. And so it creates these beautiful fjords where the ice flows down, snakes out and down to the ocean or to the lakes or further inland. And so that ice is flowing, it's moving.
Alex uses satellite data to study large-scale changes in glacial ice. But 2,000 miles to the north, Chris Larson from the University of Alaska Fairbanks spends a lot of time studying glaciers from the air. He's been flying over Alaskan mountain glaciers for many years, most recently on a NASA-funded mission called Operation Icebridge Alaska. He's absolutely enamored with his local rivers of ice.
And what do you love about mountain glaciers?
Well, they're in mountains, so they're really pretty.
You couldn't ask for a better way to experience Alaska on a large scale than to go flying around for campaign after campaign and look at all of the mountains in Alaska. Truly infinite. You just feel like you'll never see the end of them and don't want to either.
But Chris doesn't spend weeks away from home and family for the views. Chris and his colleagues at NASA want to answer some pretty big questions by learning more about Alaskan glaciers and how they tick.
You know, why does NASA care about these? Well, they actually disproportionately contribute a large amount to sea level rise.
In the long run, as the Earth warms due to climate change, The big ice sheets and mighty outlet glaciers of Greenland and Antarctica stand to contribute the most to sea level rise, simply because the vast majority of the planet's ice is stored there. But currently, it's the world's smaller mountain glaciers in comparatively warmer places like Alaska and Patagonia that are contributing about a third of all inputs to sea level rise, even though they account for only 1% of the world's ice.
Mostly due to them being dynamic. They have water at the bed, which allows them to slide fast, and they react quickly to climate change and have higher velocities than their polar counterparts.
Back at JPL, AKwx uses satellite measurements of global ice and computer models to predict ultimately how much sea level rise we might see due to climate change. But in the case of mountain glaciers, we also care about the local impacts of disappearing ice.
When we think of changes in ice sheets, we typically think of just what is the consequence for sea level rise and the future evolution of the ice sheets. But glaciers in other regions, like high mountain Asia, Alaska, the European Alps, these are places where changes in runoff matters to stream flows. In places like high mountain Asia, you have a lot of glaciers that feed the streams that flow down to populated regions. And that runoff becomes significant for water resources, irrigation, and agriculture.
Both Alex and Chris are passionate about understanding how glaciers are changing and what it means for our planet's future. They'll continue to use tools like elevation maps from the ICESat-2 satellite and detailed airborne measurements to monitor changing ice.
By the end of the tunnel, you're about 100 feet underground, and you're surrounded by bones sticking out of the wall from the steppe bison and the mastodons. There's sticks that are 40,000 years old. There's grass that's still green, that's tens of thousands of years old.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
And now for your marine forecast. Starting out with the sea ice edge, the ice has actually been surging toward the southwest at about 10 nautical miles per day. And this has been due to some persistent northeast winds, and the northeast wind regime is going to be lasting for a while. Starting out for our marine forecast for southeast Alaska, pretty much offshore flow. On the inside waters, northerlies 25 knots, seas up to 5 feet. And then on the outside waters, ranging from about 15 all the way up to 20 knots, seas up to 7 feet. And then for Thursday's marine forecast, again, offshore flow, northerlies up to 20 knots, seas 4 feet on the inside waters. And then on the outside waters, 10 to 15 knots and seas up to 8 feet. For South Central, easterlies on the outside, 15 to all the way up to 30 knots, but seas 6 feet, predominantly as a wind wave. Prince William Sound, easterlies 10 knots, seas 2 feet. And then for Cook Inlet, 20 to 30 knots out of the northeast, seas up to 9 feet. And then for Thursday, easterlies 15 all the way up to gale force 35 knots as you get down toward Kodiak Island, seas up to 10 feet. For Prince William Sound, northerlies 10 knots, seas 2 feet. And for northeasterlies 25 to 30 knots in Cook Inlet and seas up to 8 feet down by Augustine Island. For Alaska Peninsula, Kodiak Island, on the outside, gale force 35 up to 45 knots, seas up to 18 feet, especially as you get down off of Sand Point. And then on the Pacific, on the Bering Sea side, 30 to 35 knots, seas up to 11 feet off of Coal Bay. And then for Thursday's marine forecast, we have easterlies 20 all the way up to 30 knots, seas 15 feet on the Pacific side, and for the Bering Sea side, 25 to 30 knots and seas up to 9 feet. For the Aleutian Chain, northeasterlies coming around the north and then up to 35 knots on the Bering Sea side, seas 13 feet there, and 25 all the way up to 45 knots, seas 17 feet, especially strongest winds south of Alaska. And then for the Aleutian Chain, kind of a mixed bag of wind directions. coming around 15 to 25 knots, seas up to 10 feet on the Bering Sea side, and 20 to 30 knots with seas up to 12 feet on the Pacific side. For the marine forecast for the west coast, northeasterlies, offshore flow, 15 all the way up to 30 knots, seas 9 feet down by the Pribilos, 5 feet near St. Matthews, and that ice edge holding near St. Matthew. And then for Thursday's forecast, easterlies, 15 all the way up to 30 knots down by the Pribilos, seas up to 11 feet there off of the Pribilos, and then 20 knots and seas 5 feet off of St. Matthew. For the Arctic coast on Wednesday, westerlies 10 to 20 knots over the ice, and then as you get down toward the Bering Strait, 10 to 15 knots. And for Thursday forecast, southwesterlies to southerlies, 10 knots along the north slope, and then we have 10 to 15 knots through the Bering Strait over the ice. So looking again, a recap of tonight's weather, that system down south of Coal Bay, 966 millibar low, but the main story is 1040 millibar Arctic high pressure system over the north. And then as we get into Wednesday, that front wraps around that low weakens to 986 millibars south of Coal Bay. Rain around that system, but pretty dry across most of Alaska for Wednesday. Some rain and mixed snow showers in the far western Bering Sea. And then for Thursday, 1029 millibar high up by Banks Island. And then coming across there, we have some easterly flow, weak low, 10 millibars out in the Gulf, and system weakening, but precipitation from southwest Alaska down through the Alaska Peninsula.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal, pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.